What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 9th, 2018. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And, of course, in hour number 3, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us with her unique perspective on the world. Now, today is the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And for those of you watching this on YouTube, these are actually some bits of concrete from when the wall was torn down, which one of our German readers sent to us as a contribution to the world-famous WhatReallyHappened.com debris collection, which I've mentioned here before. Sunday, of course, is Veterans Day. It is the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. So, of course, you know, by golly, we've got to get another world war going here. Those poor people over in the defense industries, they've got nothing to do. They're just sitting there with rubber bands shooting paper clips back and forth at each other. All right, getting on into it, poor California. They can't seem to catch a break. There are 3 major wildfires out there. Camp, Woolsey, and Hill fires. They're raging across California. The Camp fire is moving particularly fast. It's burning at a rate of about 80 football fields equivalent per minute, and tens of thousands of people have been ordered evacuated from their homes. And again, what's going on here? Well, money that should have gone into maintaining the fire breaks and fire prevention, fire suppression, has been spent on the war. And those people in California are paying the price for it. All right, so let's get into the elections here. We would have thought that everything was over last Tuesday, but no. Fox News right now was showing there's a clash of protesters down in Florida around Brenda Snipes, who is emerging as the architect of what is turning into another election disaster here. So basically, the midterm elections, America did vote overwhelmingly Republican because the Democrats were campaigning on a platform that white heterosexual males, who are the victimizers of women and gays and minorities, were villains. And of course, white heterosexual males who happen to be Democrat aren't going to vote for that platform. Again, we're seeing indications of massive fraud. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. But looking back at all the candidates who were endorsed by big Hollywood celebrities, it doesn't seem to have had an effect. And I think that's because the general public understands these are just film and TV and music stars who don't really know all that much about politics. But the bump from the celebrity endorsements, it just wasn't there. The blue wave turned out to basically be a blue trickle at best here. Now, of course, the Democrats are celebrating their control of the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi is already out there saying she's going to be the next Speaker of the House, although there are 8 other Democrats saying, no, we don't want another Pelosi speakership. So there's going to be a fight for that position here. The part that concerns me is right after the 2016 election, and everybody was going ballistic. Oh, Trump is in there. Trump and Pence are in there. And there was a lawyer that was connected to the Democratic campaign that came on out and talked about getting rid of Donald Trump and Michael Pence at the same time. Now, I don't know how he was planning on doing that. There's certainly no legal way to do that. But were that to happen, guess who steps into the Oval Office? The Speaker of the House. And that may be why Nancy Pelosi is out there just gunning so hard for this thing, along with her incredible ego. Okay, so getting on back down to Florida, Governor Rick Scott he's now gone public. There is rampant voter fraud going on in Broward and Palm Beach counties, probably in several others as well. And Rick Scott's Senate campaign is now suing the Broward County election supervisor to turn over the records regarding how the ballots are being counted, because ballots seem to be appearing from thin air. At the end of election night, the Broward County Supervisor of Elections said that 634,000 votes had been cast. But by yesterday afternoon, oh my goodness, we're now up to 712,040 ballots. And we don't know how many are remaining still to be counted. And they're claiming they're just finding these ballots all over the place. There was a teacher in Florida, again, Broward County, found a box in the storage area of her elementary school that was supposedly left behind by election workers or planted by somebody who's engaging in the fraud. And so that got turned on in, and that's going to be added to the mess as well here. All right, now Perkins Coie lawyer and Hillary Clinton fixer Mark Elias, he's in charge of the Democrats' Florida recount operation. This guy is as crooked as it gets. He's a fixer. It says so right in the headline. And so he's going to go on down there and make sure that, this election gets stolen fair and square. Now, Trump has already responded to this by tweeting, saying that he's going to send better lawyers to Florida to expose the fraud. So Governor Scott has now sent in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to investigate vote counting in these stronghold counties to find out what the heck is going on. And it's kind of interesting. Scott actually kind of dropped the ball, because following the debacle in 2016, Florida committed to closely monitoring the 2018 midterms, and clearly they did not. Somebody got the fix in on that. And we're seeing in many races all across the country where on election night the race is declared for a Republican candidate, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the night there's this miraculous come from behind reversal for the Democrats. And it's pretty obvious what's going on. So Florida Governor Scott, who is the governor, he's got the authority to do that, is ordering the state police to seize all the outstanding ballots so they know how many there are. Because what's going on here is nobody will say, we only have XYZ ballots left to count. It's like they're going to keep on finding ballots until they get the result that they want. They found 46,000 Democrat votes the day after Election Day. It's a miracle. It's a miracle here. So protesters have gathered outside Brenda Snipes' office. And apparently there are some counter-protesters there saying, oh, you Republicans, you're being sore losers. Well, you haven't lost yet, but you're going to lose, and you're going to be a sore loser. And apparently Snipes is feeling the pressure because she was outside being interviewed by the media. And a reporter said, how many ballots are there? And apparently she lost it and snapped at him, didn't answer the question. So this is pretty dirty. And if you look at Broward County and Palm Beach, they have a terrible, terrible history of election, what the media likes to call irregularities. They're not irregularities. It's voter fraud. It's election fraud. I mean, for decades, Broward County has been a hot zone for election night chaos. And of course, we all remember what happened back in 2000 between George Bush and Al Gore. And basically, There was a very close finish between George W. Bush and Al Gore, and Florida very often is the deciding state in these elections, and that's why they want a Democratic governor for the state going into 2020. That's really what's on the line here. So you had this issue of the so-called dangling chads, and the Gore campaign pushed for manual recounts in 4 Florida counties, and the recounts were all being handled differently, different definitions for what constituted a legitimate ballot. This ran for 36 days after the election until the United States Supreme Court basically stepped on in and halted all the counts, preserving George Bush's slim win. I mean, this was such a spectacle. In 2008, there was a TV movie made called Recount. Stellar cast: Kevin Spacey, Bob Balaban, Ed Begley Jr., Laura Dern, John Hurt, Dennis Leary. And it was all about the events that were down there. And you can see bits and pieces of it over on YouTube, and it may be out there on Hulu. But somebody in TV programming has to get this up, you know, as a preview of coming attractions, because we're clearly going into a repeat of this. So back in 2001, Miriam Oliphant was the county's election supervisor. It's an elected office. And her first election started with 25 Broward precincts opening late. Workers failed to show up. Machines broke. Hundreds of uncounted ballots were later discovered. This is endemic. To me, there's a pattern. It's deliberate here. Apparently, a year later, more mail-in ballots, 17,245, were returned as undeliverable than were cast. Now, at that point, then Governor Jeb Bush removed Oliphant from the office and appointed Snipes to the position. The Washington Post reported that going into the 2004 presidential election, Florida was once again expected to be a decisive swing state. And as Election Day approached, Snipes blamed the U.S. Postal Service for losing 58,000 absentee ballots. Then she backpedaled and said only 6,000 ballots were gone. Postal officials said, no, we didn't lose anything at all. And then Snipes' office dropped off 2,400 absentee ballots at the post office on a Saturday before the election, after the mail carriers were already gone for the day, meaning there was no way those were going to actually get delivered. She just wanted to be able to say, oh, we took them to the post office. We don't know what happened to them. Going on back to 2016, remember Democratic Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz was facing a primary challenge by a Bernie Sanders-backed candidate named Tim Canova in Florida's 23rd District. Canova sued Broward election officials in order to inspect the physical ballots in the race. But Snipes' office had destroyed all the physical originals of the ballots. All they had left were the computer records. This is a violation of a federal statute requiring congressional ballots be saved for 22 months after an election. So, apparently, Florida election officials have until tomorrow to tally the votes to determine whether both the Senate and gubernatorial races will go into a recount. But apparently, yesterday, Snipes, adding fuel to the fire, says she can't explain how long her office's count will take. GOP chairwoman Rona McDaniel basically came on out and saying the Broward election supervisor has been pulling stunts like this for years, and we're not going to let her get away with it. It's going to go in, it's going to go into a repeat of 2000 here. Last year, somebody did a survey of voter registrations in Broward County and found literally thousands of voters over the age of 100. And apparently they were scratching their heads over the fact that Broward County has more registered voters than citizens of voting age. Ooh, I wonder how that comes about. Oh, I mean, going back, looking through the headlines. Sun Sentinel 2018, illegally destroying ballots. Miami Herald 2018, absentee ballots that never arrived. Miami Herald, November 4th, 2014, fellow Democrats accused her precinct of individual and systemic breakdowns that made it difficult for voters to cast regular ballots. Miami Herald 2018 posted election results half an hour before the polls closed, which is a violation of election law. And it goes on and on and on and on. Now, Florida isn't the only state where there are issues, because apparently out in Arizona, there's another miraculous come-from-behind victory where Democratic Representative Kirsten Sinema, who was declared the loser on election night, has now, because of late vote counting and votes showing up, she's now pulled into the lead over Republican Representative Martha McSally. It's only a few thousand votes, and they're trying to say there'll be enough votes where there won't be a recount. But apparently, Republicans have filed a lawsuit over allegations that some legitimate votes were basically dumped into a bin where unusable votes were being stored. So it's a joke here. It's absolutely a joke what's going on. Over in Georgia, Brian Kemp, the Republican, was leading Stacey Abrams, his Democratic rival, by about 63,000 votes as of last night. And he had 50.3% of the total. But Ms. Abrams' campaign is still insisting that when all the votes are counted, Mr. Kemp's share may yet fall below 50%, which would trigger a runoff election in early December. Over in Texas, 9 people have been arrested for election fraud. Guadalupe Sanchez Garza, Araceli Gutierrez, Brenda Rodriguez, Rosendo Rodriguez, Cynthia Tamez, Ruby Tamez, Belinda Rodriguez, Felicia Yolanda Rodriguez, and Jerry Gonzalez Jr. They will be prosecuted by the Hidalgo County's District Attorney's Office. Okay. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. I hope you were all paying attention to this stuff that's going on. And if you see news about election fraud in other states that I have not covered, please send it on in, because I'm going to kick up a real stink about this. Because the entire U.S. election system is discredited. We're seeing fraudulent, suspicious activities reported nationwide that always seem to benefit the Democrats. Remember that video that came on out, again, Broward County? Boxes of ballots were being taken out of a private car and loaded into a rental van, which broke the chain of custody. So, anyway, in one recent election, Philadelphia had more votes than voters in the district. In 2016, in Detroit, some votes were so overstated in the inner city, they could not be recounted, which means they had to go with the original and fraudulent vote totals. We don't know what's going on in these really gigantic cities, the big cities, which are all Democratic strongholds. Okay, so let's get on to the circus that is emerging around the firing of Jeff Sessions and the hiring of Whitaker, because the media, again, has abandoned even the pretense of journalism and reporting to just go on the attack. There are reports that MSNBC's Rachel Maddow is organizing a protest march denouncing Trump for firing Sessions. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're just now getting word that down in Florida, the judge has ruled in favor of Governor Rick Scott's lawsuit. And during the next break, I'm going to try and figure out exactly what that entails, what the details of that are going to be. But again, it's going to be a repeat of 2000. And I hope the American people are going to wake up and say, it is time to fix this mess. And I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump because he campaigned on the idea of election fraud. Remember when he first said that there might be election fraud and everybody said, oh, that's ridiculous. You can't possibly rig American elections. You can't. And then, of course, as soon as Trump won, everybody was screaming, the election was rigged. The election was rigged. Russia came on in here and did all of this. They are such children over there in D.C. All right, so we're talking about the firing of Jeff Sessions and the appointment of his former chief of staff as an interim or acting attorney general. You know the real joke about all this? When President Trump nominated Jeff Sessions to be attorney general, the corporate media excoriated him, declared him unfit for office. And now that he's been fired, corporate media are his defenders. Oh, that dastardly Trump. How dare he fire Sessions? Apparently over at CNN, Jake Tapper is saying this is how gangsters act. And they got John Dean from all the way back in Watergate to say that Sessions' firing was planned like a murder. I mean, this is really extreme, over the edge stuff, over the shark stuff. Okay? The president does have the authority to fire people. That's just the way it is. And I think most of us can agree that Sessions was a disappointment as Attorney General, that he seemed to be just shaping up as yet another lackey of the deep state like his multiple predecessors here. But apparently there are a lot of people who are now very upset that this protector is now out and that we might actually have an acting Attorney General who might actually look at some prosecutions. So Senator Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat, West Virginia, is saying the U.S. is on the verge of a constitutional crisis because of the forced resignation of Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Manchin went on to say it's a big mistake to let Sessions go. There's no constitutional crisis. Trump has the authority to fire people. That's it. They're really trying to fan that. What do they think they're going to do? Force Trump to bring Sessions back on in, or basically force Trump to appoint a new attorney general who is more amenable to continuing all the crime and corruption that we see here. Apparently, Republican Senator Jeff Flake is trying to ram through legislation to protect Robert Mueller from being fired. Now, that violates the separation of powers doctrine. Congress doesn't get to hire and fire people inside the executive branch. It doesn't happen. But they want to keep that Russia probe going. I mean, you saw how much they campaigned on it going into the midterms. They want to keep it alive for 2020. Oh, we're pretty sure there was Russian collusion. We have no evidence, but we've got to keep the investigation going here. So more than a dozen U.S. states' attorneys generals signed a document calling for acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker to recuse himself from overseeing the Russia investigation. And Whitaker basically told them to shove it, that his job is to oversee the Department of Justice. He is going to oversee the Department of Justice. And, of course, that got Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer on the warpath, also screaming, yes, Whitaker should recuse himself because he's had previous comments that he thinks this investigation is going nowhere, and that reveals a deep bias. The investigation is going nowhere. All this money, all this time, they found nothing. They just constantly flog this dead horse to the point where you can't even recognize it's a horse any longer, and get the corporate media to say, oh yes, the investigations are continuing. That's the story. We're still investigating. We know that any day now, any day, we're going to bring down Donald Trump. Now, somebody has already organized a protest in New York City against Trump for the firing of Sessions. And it wasn't a particularly large crowd, but it was notable for having all those professionally printed signs, which is always a dead giveaway when you're dealing with a rent-a-crowd. The other day, George Conway wrote an op-ed in the New York Times critical of the president, and basically saying that making Matthew Whitaker the acting attorney general was unconstitutional and illegal. Now, mind you, this guy's a lawyer, and the co-author of the op-ed was a lawyer. They should know better than that. The president is allowed to make interim appointments pending confirmation of a nominee by Congress, because the job has to get done. Trump has already dismissed this guy as saying he's just seeking publicity. Pathetic bid for attention. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here and getting on back to the elections here. Governor Rick Scott's lawsuit in Florida was to basically force the supervisor of elections to open up all the records. The judge ruled in favor of that, saying that it has to happen before 7 p.m. tonight. The idea of being able to go on in and look at just exactly how many votes were actually cast versus how much were counted. They're going to do an eyeball check on all of this. Somebody apparently got on video a car pulling up to the offices of the supervisor of elections and getting a large box out of the back and carrying it into the building. And of course, the obvious question is, are these more Democratic ballots that are being manufactured somewhere? So it really is crooked. Now, apparently out in Arizona, they're now officially saying, yes, there's election fraud. The Arizona Republican Party is accusing Maricopa County Recorder Adrian Fontes of premeditated destruction of evidence following voting irregularities in the election. It's not an irregularity. It's a fraud. So the Arizona GOP has now filed their own lawsuit. Okay. Now, getting on back to this thing. The other day, we reported on a story that said Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is recovering from a bad fall in her office right now, might be stepping down from the Supreme Court in the near future. And it prompted a strong reaction from somebody who said, oh, it's got to be fake news. It's got to be fake news. Okay, well, you know, there's a lot of that out there, and we have to be very careful. But I'm now getting this from multiple sources that Ruth Bader Ginsburg cancer has returned. She's had 2 different fights with 2 different kinds of cancer. Both had gone into remission. Apparently, they're out of remission, and obviously, she's got to focus on her health. So, again, it looks like Trump is going to have a chance to nominate another Supreme Court justice, and we get to go through that whole Brett Kavanaugh circus all over again. All right, Ocasio-Cortez, still playing the victim card. She won her election, or she succeeded in stealing, and now she's crying poor mouth because she has to live in Washington, D.C. for 3 months before she actually starts getting her congressional paycheck, and she doesn't have the money for an apartment. So she wants people to set a GoFundMe page. The hand is out. She's begging. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, another one. A judge just found Broward County in violation of the Constitution. That came out on top of the order for election officials to comply before 7. And yeah, it's coming in from all over. In 2000, it was just Florida. And I'm sure there was election fraud going on all across the country. Everybody saw it in Florida, and the corporate media said, well, it was this one state this one time. No, it is an epidemic. U.S. elections do not even come close to meeting the minimum standards for honesty, transparency, and integrity. And that's just the way it is. And I'm hoping that Trump will wake up and realize something has to be done about this. I hope the American people stand up and say, we need a simple, reliable, trustworthy voting system. And again, I have posted to whatreallyhappened.com my article on how to have honest elections. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but if you think about how it's all being handled, we don't have to worry about ballots leaving the polling places. They're counted right there, so nobody can stuff the ballot boxes on the way to the counting center. There are, in fact, under my scheme, there are no counting centers. There's no tabulation centers where shenanigans can happen or the chads can dangle. Okay. All right, let's talk about Tucker Carlson. As you know, his family was harassed by Antifa, who came up to his home, said, we know where you live. They damaged his door. They damaged his security system. Apparently, they were demanding that he leave town. A real-life deplatforming. You know, just get on out of here. And apparently, the security system, while it was still working, did get pictures of some of these Antifa people without their masks on. And Washington's Metropolitan Police Department says it's treating the incident as a suspected hate crime. Apparently, they vandalized Carlson's property. They spray painted an anarchy symbol on the driveway. And here is the bizarre thing. Antifa was up there saying Tucker Carlson has to go because he is spreading fear. He is spreading fear. We're afraid because of Tucker Carlson here. Now, Matt Yglesias, who's a prominent editor of Vox.com, actually tweeted on out in support of Smash Racism DC, which is the Antifa group whose members swarmed Tucker Carlson's front yard, carried signs with his home address written on them, in retaliation for Carlson's supposed role in spreading fear. Well, that backflashed rather seriously, and Matt Yglesias basically deleted all of his tweets. You got a very negative reaction to all of that here. Okay, in other news regarding our domestic politics, the U.S. Attorney in New Haven, Connecticut announced that a federal grand jury has returned 2 indictments charging 5 people with theft of federal funds. One of the individuals charged is James Sullivan, who is married to California Democratic Representative Linda Sanchez. Getting on back to Antifa, apparently they're expanding their hit list. They're going to start going after other people, start harassing them. This is real brown shirt stuff. This is what the Nazis were doing before they finally took control of Germany. So, now, Michael Avenatti, and I would also count this as another pitiful bid for attention here. He's out there screaming that Trump needs to be indicted following a Wall Street Journal story claiming that Donald Trump was right in the middle of the cash payoffs to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. Okay? There's only one small problem. Okay, I don't agree with Trump having these affairs while he's a married man, because he did do it while he was married to Melania. But for an indictment, there has to be an actual crime. And I don't know which states actually have a law against extramarital sex. I rather suspect hardly any, hardly any do. And as far as the payoffs were concerned, it was a straight business transaction. I will give you money. You will keep quiet about whatever. And it's not like payoffs for silence are unknown in our society. It happens all the time. Hush money has a very long and ignoble tradition going back. But Avenatti is out there screaming, we're going to have an indictment. We've got him this time. We're going to get him. You know, I agree. Trump behaved badly. and unfortunately, fooling around is relatively common, not just for billionaires. Roughly half of all married people fool around. That's the statistic. And who wouldn't be tempted by a Playboy bunny or a porn star? So anyway, Avenetti's out there jawing about it. Got to be a real crime before you can have an indictment. You got to have a real crime before you can impeach. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Democrats are trying to reverse the election results on so many Senate seats. They're trying to basically narrow that edge to get the impeachment agenda going again, forgetting it takes a 2/3 vote of the Senate to remove from office, and they're never, ever going to get that. Now, a while back, there was this Georgetown University professor, C. Christine Fair. She tweeted out, Republican men should be castrated. Now, she's on administrative leave because of that violent tweet. And now she's out there tweeting again. And according to the Washington Free Beacon, basically is calling Fox News terrorists. The rhetoric is getting so over the top, and it does make it impossible to actually have any kind of a discussion, a reasonable discussion, to try and bring the country together. And obviously, from the liberal point of view, they don't want to see that happen. They want, a liberalized America, a socialized America. And they want conservatism to be utterly gone. All righty. All right, so moving on to the southern border. As you know, there are these 4 migrant caravans of people marching through Mexico now, heading for our border with the intent of sneaking their way into this country. Trump has some military down there on the border rolling out the razor wire, which is nasty, nasty stuff, and I presume other non-lethal means of encouraging these people to basically stay on their side of the fence here. But Trump has done something that he's allowed to do, again, under Title 8. He has issued a rule that says very simply that any migrant who is in violation of U.S. immigration law will not be considered for asylum. That's going to simplify the paperwork quite a bit. Basically saying, if they step across the border without permission, that asylum paperwork the United Nations has been helping them fill out instantly becomes worthless. I think that was very, very, very clever. And again, our country's in serious trouble. We cannot afford to go on being the rest of the world's refuse bin. We've run out of room. We're running out of resources here. So I saw a commercial earlier today. The midterms are over. Now it's time to build the wall. And that may prove difficult because under the Constitution, revenue measures must originate in the House, which is now under the control of the Democrats. Oh, we have a caller on the line. Okay, Frank in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. Hey, I thought Republican men were already castrated.
This one isn't. I'm not going to prove it on YouTube or anything, but just take my word for it.
Well, what about politicians?
Well, I don't know. If you look at all that hush money that's being paid out by Congress to the congressional interns, I would say that right there suggests that the members of Congress are in good working order.
The gay male pages?
Sorry?
The gay male pages?
I think it crosses all categories. The female pages, the interns, the clerks. They spend a lot of money.
Yeah, they spend a lot of money. I tell you what.
And it's rather ironic. It's rather ironic that so much hush money is being paid out on behalf of members of Congress. Nobody thinks it's a big deal, but Donald Trump.
Everybody expects it.
Yeah, but Donald Trump pays, hush money to this porn star and this Playboy. I think she was a centerfold at one point. And it's this big thing, and Avenetti's out there screaming indictment, indictment.
Well, they sure won't stand up to AIPAC, that's for sure.
No, they haven't done that. AIPAC's got their numbers. Okay. Hello, Frank. Are you still there? I guess not. Okay, we're going to let him go. And getting on back to the news here. Today, and maybe this is to sort of report on something that isn't the election meltdown in Florida and Arizona and Georgia, and who knows where it's going to be tomorrow. This thing could spread like the California wildfires. They're going back and they're doing more reporting on this shooting that took place out in Thousand Oaks. And they're saying that they still can't find a motive. Now, you've probably seen on TV this shooter, Long, was streaming the event, I think, to Instagram and commenting on it. And there was this Facebook post that came on out and said, "I hope people call me insane," laughing emojis. Wouldn't that be just a big ball of irony? Yeah, I'm insane, but the only thing you people do after these shootings is hopes and prayers, or keep you in my thoughts every time and wonder why these keep happening. Now, CNN contacted a friend of Long's who requested anonymity and said that Facebook post doesn't sound like the guy. I don't know what was going on through his head when he wrote this. It must have been terrible. Well, that right there is a clue. The guy is sounding like he's off his rocker on social media. They can't find any other motive for him to do this. Apparently, he went to this country music bar on a regular basis. They did line dancing there, and he was a big fan. And then all of a sudden, he flips out, walks in, and starts shooting people at random. There's a big question out there that nobody wants to talk about. What medications was this guy on or withdrawing from? Now, the liberals want to blame the guns and take them away. But if you have people who are being driven to violence by medication and they don't have access to guns, they'll find something else. Swords, knives. We got to solve this problem here. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we've got another caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently, South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham basically tweeted on out that what's going on down in Broward County is just like Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation process. Democrats don't allow the law to stand in the way of the desired outcome, and he's certainly right about that one. I don't agree with Lindsey Graham on a lot of stuff, in particular his devotion to Israel, but he nailed it on this one. Okay, I'm going to look at that later. Let's go to the phones now to Francis in Montreal. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. About a week ago, I called you up and I was talking about the rendition program, and I was surprised that there was this 80,000 people have been kidnapped and tortured since 9/11. Yeah, I couldn't wrap my head around such a huge number. Then, after I talked, I was thinking about it and reading about it. I was thinking, like a program that big takes a lot of people. Like, how many kidnappers and torturers are there out there? This war on terror, it's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's crazy, and I mean, these 80,000 people weren't all tortured at once. We know that the CIA is operating these rendition sites in multiple countries, where they're grabbing people and torturing them, apparently to get politically expedient confessions, because that's all you get when you use torture. The person being tortured is going to say what they think the torturer wants to hear.
At one time, even Assad was a part of that torture program in Syria. And the thing that got me, though, is apparently it's got from what I could gather, it's got an annual budget of $13 billion a year. And it's getting corrupted. And what's happening is, like, this is like New York Times and Washington Post are reporting on this. The CIA agents, I guess, figure they deserve to have a James Bond lifestyle. So, like, for example, they're taking someone in a rendition to Italy, and they're in Milan. And so they go rent the most luxurious suites in the most expensive hotel in Milan. And they're there for 3 weeks. And they're, like, ordering the finest, Italian wines and drinking, ordering up crystal glasses. And they ran up $150,000 bill for 3 weeks in a fine hotel, Nice
work if you can get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very sorry situation, and I'm not sure where these numbers are coming from, the 80,000 and the 13 billion. But yeah, obviously, if you have a government that's running a covert torture operation, the people actually running the operation get a lot of leeway in terms of what they can get away with, because
they're renting private jets.
They could go public. They could become a whistleblower. They could go public and say, I was a torturer for the U.S. government.
Yeah, well, not too many people want to admit to torturing children. Anyway, have a good day, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with another call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. We're going to go right back to the phones to Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha, Kevin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. To the last caller, I don't think it's a war on terror. I think it's a war of terror waged on the United States public, us, the citizens here, and around the world. And the same thing with the war on drugs. I think it's a war of drugs. At one point, I was part of the problem.
It's a war. It's a war on the other people's drugs. That's what it is. It's a war on the other people's drugs, because DEA and FBI, they never go anywhere near any of the CIA-connected smuggling operations. I mean, look how long Barry Seal got away with doing what he was doing. The war on drugs is the war on the competition's drugs.
Absolutely. Down in Broward County, man, everywhere you turn around, there's a scandal in this place.
Yes.
Look, to me, I was listening to a little bit of Roger Stone's feed earlier, and I thought I heard him say it's 18-wheelers full of ballots that are all 100% Democratic. Now, I may be wrong there, but that's what I thought I heard.
Well, I think he may have been exaggerating to make his point here, but apparently it may not be too far off the mark. Based on that video that surfaced about somebody putting a box of ballots out of a personal car and into the rental van, and more recently this video from earlier today about somebody just carrying a box into the election supervisor's office. You need to understand there are very strict rules for how the boxes of ballots are to be treated to maintain chain of custody and to, in theory, prevent foul play. And again, if you go back to Hacking Democracy, the documentary from HBO, one of the funniest things that they have in that is Bev Harris is checking out the seals that are supposed to be on the boxes of ballots in this election. Now, the whole point of a seal is once the ballots are in there, you close the box, you put the seal on it so nobody can get into the box without leaving an indication that some tampering has gone on. That's what a seal is supposed to do. In this case, though, the seal could just peel right off. The seal
Has Trump sent anybody to investigate this?
Well, he's going to send a bunch of lawyers down there, but I'm hoping this incident is going to get him off his duff and get the American people off their duff and demand that we get a new election system that follows some standards across the country, we get some anti-election fraud laws with some real teeth in them, because this is a national disgrace.
Absolutely. That's all I had for you. I just wanted to weigh in a little bit. I still, one other thing I wanted to ask. I was hearing that Acosta got his press things revoked or taken away from him. Is that true?
Yeah.
Good. Well, you have a great day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. The phone lines are now open. Speaking of Acosta, his defenders are now out there trying to claim that the video in which he's seen swatting away the arm of the staffer who's trying to recover the microphone has been digitally enhanced. It's been amplified to make Acosta look bad, to make it look more violent than it really did. I mean, they're really desperate for this kind of stuff. Acosta behaved badly. And the double standard here, I mean, when Obama kicked out Helen Thomas, everybody was okay with that because she dared to ask a question about Israel's nuclear weapons. You can't do that. All right, another caller here, Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I really hope this new guy with the Justice Department really sends an army of investigators down there, at least honest investigators, hopefully, and lawyers, because this county is dirty as they come.
Yep.
I still believe that that sheriff there, Israel, that he was dirty he's been dirty from the get-go, and the FBI had information on him, probably blackmailed him, and were able to set up the murder of those kids there, the school, that false flag, by probably using contractors hired by the FBI. Those men who were coming out the side door, you saw, I think there were 4 of them.
Yes.
In kind of like military gear.
Yep.
I believe that's why the stand down order from the cowardly county sheriff's office, because the FBI told them, don't do anything till we tell you to do it, okay? You tell your men to stand down, period. Because had they gone in there, it's not that they were physically afraid. Maybe they were physically afraid. I mean, bullets can don't necessarily make your day, right? But I still think they got in. But the problem was the FBI knew that if they went in there, they would see who was really doing the shooting. It wasn't that little kid Cruz, that skinny little runt Cruz.
Yep.
It was these tactical units, whoever they were. Like I said, I believe they were contractors. So that's it. And this is a very crooked county. I think it was the same thing pretty much that happened with the other crook there in Las Vegas, Sheriff Lombardo.
Yeah.
I think this is a very crooked county, and hopefully we'll
it's
get
a
to the
crooked
bottom.
nation. It's a crooked, corrupted nation. I mean,
unfortunately,
there is no more good government. There's no more honest government. It's all these opportunists and sociopaths and money junkies just warring with each other for what remains of the nation's wealth. And when you have a corrupt government, you soon learn that being equally corrupt yourself is the only path to advancement. And so we're living in a situation that if somebody wants to be a sheriff or at the top of the FBI or the Department of Justice, they're going to have to make that moral choice and say, I got to go along with the real power brokers behind the scenes who are, selling drugs into this country, and they're committing economic fraud on the American people. And you go along with it because you get a very comfortable lifestyle doing it.
Well, they have been honest sheriffs. Clark is one in Milwaukee. Yes. I believe he's honest. Of course, Sheriff Mack, you heard of him, right?
Yes.
Mack and Arizona Sheriff, he's on. But they don't get very far. You know what I mean? That Sheriff Mack, I don't think he's, he tried to run for Congress, I know, and he didn't get very far either. Because people don't appreciate somebody like that, a real constitutional peace officer.
Or the election was rigged against him.
Probably a combination of both of those things. And Sheriff Clark, of course, Trump didn't want to select him for FBI chief, and I think we'd be in a lot better shape had he done that, either FBI or DHS. And that's the unfortunate thing, because the sheriff at least is elected by the people, unlike a police chief who's just a total political hack appointed by another political hack. But it really is a shame. But the thing is this: now hopefully we do have some kind of an honest attorney general, and maybe we will get to the bottom of things here in both Coward County and wherever in Arizona. By the way, I don't care. Maybe they don't deserve another senator. Both of them just go without a senator for a few years, because this thing may be tied up in court for years. So you just don't have a senator. Don't complain then when you get certain things you want. And the same thing with the governor of Florida. Hey, maybe there'll be no governor.
Well, this will be resolved by January when the new Congress gets seated and the new governors are sworn in. And I think what's going to happen, personally, I hope it does turn into a mess similar to 2000. That just drags on, and everybody just takes a look at what's going on with this stupid election system that we have. And then at the last second, the Supreme Court is going to come on in, and they'll declare somebody won this election, somebody won that election. But I hope it gets really messy and really ugly, because the American people, they need to get motivated about, reminding Donald Trump that he did make a promise to clean up this mess, and he dropped the ball. And we're seeing the results of his failure in Broward, Palm Beach, Georgia, Arizona, and who knows where all else this is going to erupt.
By the way, I just want to say one thing too about Miss Ginsburg there, Judge Ginsburg.
Yeah.
I wish her the best. The woman is, she's not a bad person from everything I understand. She and Judge Justice Scalia were actually very close, even though they were totally different politically. They actually went out to dinner together a lot. They really liked each other. And from everything I understand, she's a nice woman. I just don't agree with her politically. But I do wish her the best. I really do.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. It's tough dealing with cancer. It's tough dealing with being that old. And I do wish her well. And I hope it works. I mean, Trump tweeted out earlier today that he hopes she recovers from her fall in her office, and that she serves on the bench for many years to come. But again, I'm hearing from multiple sources that may not happen.
Not if she's got recurring cancer, and she had pancreatic cancer, which is one of the worst.
Yes.
Amazing she lasted this long, really. That's what took Michael Landon. Remember, Little Joe?
Yeah.
And he was, and that Little House on the Prairie, and he was, seemingly okay, and like 2 or 3 months later, boom, he was gone.
Yep.
So it's a very horrible form, So anyway, that's all I wanted to say, basically. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network and getting on back to the news. Let's talk about the conflict zones, of which there are many. Apparently, government forces in Syria have now freed all the hostages that were being held by ISIS in al-Saweda. And so now that ISIS cannot use those hostages for leverage, Syrian forces are going to uncork on them, starting with Daesh in the Safa region. So ISIS no longer has any bargaining chips. So it's really going to be on. Now, let's talk about Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, because a lot of people were thinking after this Khashoggi murder that he might be forced from power. There's a lot of people who want him out of power. And at one point I was thinking the reason that the corporate media was making a big stink about Khashoggi when they were oblivious to all the other journalists who are being killed around the world was it was a campaign to get rid of him. Then, of course, we had Benjamin Netanyahu stand up and say, oh, no, Mohammed's my bud, and calling Washington, D.C., calling the media, calling everybody, saying, no, Salman's going to stay. And a lot of people thought, well, that's it. His Highnessness Netanyahu has spoken, and that will be the end of it. But apparently not. There's a story that came out of Middle East Monitor saying that there is a great deal of pressure on Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to step down, and that he's already looking for someplace in the world where he can have refuge, where he can move to, and I'm sure he'll take a big chunk of his money with him, and just be guaranteed that he'll be safe and left alone and not prosecuted for some of the things that he did in Yemen. So we'll see what's going to happen there. We're going to go back to the telephones here to Loomer in Northern California. Aloha, Loomer. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, aloha, Michael. Yes, I know you keep on harping on Trump about his not following through with the voter cleanup thing through the states, but I'd like to mention to you that the feds don't have control over the states. It's a state's issue to clean up their voter rolls, and the feds don't have any right to get involved in that. The states have to go. They have to volunteer that stuff to the feds, and if they don't volunteer, there's nothing that the feds can do anything about it.
Well, I think that, first of all, we know that the federal government has intruded into the election process before because of the law passed by Congress, which mandated the use of those electronic voting machines all those years ago. So I don't think it's as clear-cut as all that. And if it is the state's responsibility to make sure the voting rules are cleaned up and their elections are honest, then there has to be stiff penalties for these election supervisors who fail to do a good job. I mean, one of the reasons we're seeing this supervisor down in Broward, I mean, if you look at all the headlines and the track record, nothing ever happens to her. She hasn't gone to jail, she hasn't been sanctioned, she hasn't been fined, she hasn't been fired, and she keeps on doing the same sort of stuff every single election. The system is totally corrupt. And I think at some point, I think we're on the verge of a national emergency here. If we, the American people, can't trust that the elections are honest, that is a real problem. And of course, the corporate media is already out there saying, oh, these were all accidents, they're all irregularities, you know, our elections are honest, they're impossible to rig, all the usual stuff they keep telling us, except that we know better than to believe them anymore. Something has to be done. And maybe what it's going to take are the people in the 50 states basically marching on their legislature and say, clean up this mess, because something has to be done.
I would agree. That's what's going to have to happen, because Trump went as far as he could. He got cooperation from a number of states, but all these ultra-liberal states would not cooperate. So that's why he had to turn it over to the Department of Homeland Security.
Well, obviously, the Department of Homeland Security, being a federal agent, is now crossing that line into states' rights to look at the election system. I'm not buying that argument. I don't think states' rights give the states latitude to rig their elections against their own people. But the first thing that has to happen is the American people, they got to get angry about this. They have to just get mad dog mean about not having honest elections, and they need to basically.
I would agree with that, Michael, 100%. I agree with you 100% on that, and that's where it's going to have to start, unfortunately. And I'm one of these people that is already even beyond the. I'm mad dog, mad too, angry also. So I thank you very much for your time, and you have a wonderful day. And tell your wife Claire to have a good day and stay healthy.
Well, we're working on that latter one, and, you know, bit by bit, slowly, she is getting better. It's just taking time, and, you know, this was a life-altering injury. There are things that she can no longer do, but right now we just focus on keeping her comfortable. Okay, Fox News is saying that the Democrats are now vowing to investigate Jeff Sessions' abrupt resignation. There's nothing to investigate. Trump asked for his resignation, which Trump has the authority to do. But the Democrats are going to say, oh, my God, Trump was exceeding his authority. No, he wasn't. not by a bit. Okay, we're going to start another phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. And Dustin, I'm probably going to have to take you through the commercial break.
Everybody thinks Trump is, I don't know, Mike. He still has John Bolton and Mike Pompeo there, and they're making foreign policy, and that should scare the crap out of us, Mike. These people should scare the crap out of us all. I mean, they're not. I mean, America first is one thing, but these people are imperialist, hegemonic, like believers. That's the difference. So Sessions, these people are the real worried. That have me worried. But Mike, real quick, I want to switch gears actually on to Saudi Arabia. What's your take on this? They're talking about splitting OPEC. Did you hear that story?
I heard that yesterday, where they're thinking of trying to find some way to basically break up the cartel, so that they're less able, to control oil prices, because they did use it against the United States many, many years ago. I think it was back in the 70s, and they were very angered by U.S. policies in support of Israel, and so they cranked down those valves, and we were waiting in lines for gasoline for hours.
But what is this going to have to do with the shift of the world order? You know what I mean? Like, does this have any place in the world? You know what I mean? Like, all right, I'm going to put you on hold.
I got to put you on hold and take a commercial break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. We're talking about the breakup of OPEC, which is actually focused on Saudi Arabia, which is like a main anchor, if you will, basically breaking off and going their own way. Now, this came out of a Saudi think tank. At this point, it's not being seriously considered as government policy. But one thing that may be happening here is under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia is definitely shifting west. They're all buddy-buddy with Israel. They're getting very close with the U.S. And it may be Crown Prince bin Salman's idea that by doing so, that he can get Saudi Arabia off that list of oil-producing nations to be regime changed. Remember back in, I think it was 2003, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle that the U.S. had an agenda to basically conquer all the oil-producing nations in the Middle East and put them under U.S. hegemonic domination. And bin Salman may be thinking, well, I'm just going to go on over and join the winning team, because at some point down the road, these other nations in the Middle East may come under military attack, and you don't want to be tangled up with an OPEC relationship when that happens. So that may be one of the reasons they're considering that. And I got some advice for bin Salman. Okay, if he thinks that by turning his back on the other OPEC nations that he's going to save himself from regime change, I wouldn't trust that. In fact, bin Salman may be out of office anyway by the end of the year. So, Dustin, what's your feedback?
Well, just because, you know what, Mike, things are moving, are shifting. Like the world's moving away from the dollar. This is happening. Yep. And, we're getting more unstable. So you just look at everything happening and you just wonder, what's next? And then you have Ruth Ginsburg, who had her fall. And Mike, do you realize these people will motivate doubly now? If Trump's got to put in a replacement for her when she leaves, because, man, they're going to go crazy. And if you look at what they did to Tucker Carlson's house, exactly right, brown shirt. Mike, do you realize a small group of people in Washington rule over us? This group is even smaller than those, don't you think? But yet they're loud and outspoken, and they tell everybody else to shut up, and we're all scared of these people because they use fear. If they call you a racist, but these people are dangerous. They are. Look at what they did to. This is where we're headed right now, and
Yeah.
Cambodia and the killing fields.
It's pure Nazism emerging inside our country, and it's kind of weird to see this thing. Russia's turning into a modern republic, and we're being dragged down into being a socialist, communist liberal paradise, which won't be a paradise for anybody.
Okay, that's all I got to say, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and we're going to start with RT in Michigan. Aloha. I'm probably going to have take you through the commercial break. What is on your mind?
I just got a quick comment. I thought that Homeland Security was in charge of keeping track of what the voting booths and everything and integrity and whatnot, and it seems to me like they failed miserably on that, and just an indication on what they're really capable of, I think.
Well, all the Department of Homeland Security did was look to make the electronic machines hack-proof, but obviously the fraud was taking place someplace else with all these magically appearing ballots. You know, like the Democrats got that cabinet from Harry Potter, and every time they open up the doors, there's another stack of ballots in there.
Yeah, just kind of an indication, though, that they're pretty incompetent, I'd say.
Well, they used to be able to get away with this stuff, even being incompetent, because the corporate media would never report on it. In the age of the internet and the independent media, we are finally seeing the reality of what life in the United States has become, and it's not a very pretty picture.
Yeah, and here in Michigan, I'm in Lower Michigan, here near Lake Michigan, and we had snow last night, and we got more predicted for over the weekend and stuff, so welcome to global warming.
And go out and make yourself a snow person.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go, and we're coming up here on a commercial break. Now, interestingly enough, as you know, there has been plans by Israel's Interior Security Minister Gilad Erdan, who's been in the news a lot lately. He wants to worsen the conditions for Palestinian prisoners. And rather surprisingly, he has met opposition from within Israel's army and Shin Bet, saying that this is just going to make matters worse. It will escalate tensions within the prisons. It will agitate the Palestinian public in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And let's face it, the world is watching what Israel is doing. And the optics are very, very bad. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And apparently out in Southern California, the entire city of Malibu has now been evacuated. And that place, I mean, first of all, obviously a very wealthy area, also very historic. So what a horrible tragedy for those poor people out there. Okay, so getting on back to what's going on over in Israel, apparently police have recommended indicting Netanyahu's lawyer over the corruption related to the $2 billion purchase of these German submarines. And so police said they have sufficient evidence to charge David Shimron with bribery and money laundering offenses for his role in the affair. Now, Shimron is also Netanyahu's cousin, and he represented the German manufacturer ThyssenKrupp involved in the sale, and has been suspected of trading his influence over the prime minister in return for a hefty cut of the deal. Police also recommended indicting a former cabinet minister, a former Navy chief, and former Netanyahu chief of staff in the affair, but so far, nothing for Benny himself. Over in France, there's been a lot of interesting talk going on. I think it's part of a larger picture. We had Macron saying that Europe needed an army to defend itself against Russia or the United States. And apparently, this is being reported in the Express in Great Britain. There was a senior French government minister apparently had this dramatic outburst and said that Europe will not allow the United States to become the trade policeman of the world. So everybody is getting fed up with the sanctions and the tariffs, and there's going to be a pushback. I think the rest of the world is going to realize the easy solution is learn how to get along without the United States. We're not indispensable anymore. Great Britain is seeking to impose European Union sanctions against Russian senior intelligence officers under a Brussels mechanism for punishing perpetrators of chemical weapons attacks. And this all, of course, goes back to the Sergei Skripal affair, which, again, I think what Brussels had in mind talking about chemical weapons attacks is talking about chemical weapons used against an entire population. But Great Britain, they're out there just goading Russia. They're goading Russia. They just want to keep poking at that bear. They want the bear to poke back, and then they can say, see, Russia's being aggressive here. Speaking of Russia, Russia and Saudi Arabia are now in negotiations over delivery of the S-400 air defense system to Saudi Arabia. And as good as the S-300 is, and it seems to be scaring off a lot of people around Syria, this is the latest generation of deployed air defense system. The S-500 is already in development, but this system can carry 3 different types of missiles capable of destroying a variety of near and distant aerial targets ranging from reconnaissance aircraft to ballistic missiles. So Saudi Arabia is getting new toys. Apparently, French President Macron came on out once again saying Russia's a threat. Russia's a threat to us all. And especially since we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the ending of World War I, an historian, Edward Husson, decided to remind Macron in an article for Atlantico to remember that in both world wars, Russia saved France. In both of those wars, the Russian forces exhausted the German forces. So, a little bit of ingratitude here. Oh, I thought this person had gone away. Over in the Philippines, Imelda Marcos, remember her? She of the 1,000 pairs of glittery shoes. She has now been arrested for 7 counts of graft, and it comes at a particularly embarrassing time because she is running for Ilocos Norte governor in next year's elections. And this arrest, and she could face the rest of her life in jail for all of these counts of graft. But the ombudsman prosecutor, Ray Kalila, said she can still run until the court's decision becomes final and executory. So apparently she's been ordered, arrested, and facing trial, but until she's sentenced, she can still run for office. Can't believe anybody would vote for her. Okay, let's talk about what's going on up in space from the military point of view. As you know, there are actually treaties that bar certain weapons from being put into space. It's called the Outer Space Treaty. And everybody is already looking at ways to sort of get around that, loopholes that they can use. And the Air Force has come up with something they're calling Project Thor. And basically it's to deliver a kinetic strike from orbit that would actually have the energy release of a small nuclear weapon. And the way it's going to work is they're going to place into orbit a bundle of telephone pole-sized rods made out of tungsten, which is a very tough metal with the highest melting point of any element. Tungsten is used for the penetrators on tank munitions, the discarding sabot rounds, the darts. I think they call them the silver bullet. That metal. And the idea is these rods could be deorbited at the right moment and would just simply fall straight down 1,000-mile plummet to Earth and strike the ground at more than 10 times the speed of sound. Technically, it's not a weapon in space, so they're moving ahead with that one. Now, we talked about this yesterday, and I wanted to bring this story back on up. Over in Norway, they're having this huge military exercise. And in this harbor, this warship was coming back into port after the exercise and basically got holed. And it's still in danger of sinking. 8 people were injured. The rest of the crew is evacuated. They're trying to figure out how they're going to keep this thing from going on over. There was very little damage to the tanker that struck the ship. This goes back to something I was saying before about a good reason to be very careful about going to war. Modern U.S. warships, and for that matter, aircraft, are over-reliant on active defensive systems. The days of the armor belt appear to be gone. They have very lightweight ships. A lot of them are made out of aluminum now. And they rely on the Sea Whiz or various other active denial systems to protect the ship. But if they fail, if they run out of ammo, if you get rammed, it causes a huge amount of damage. And I think back to that story some years ago where the Navy was testing a reconnaissance drone, and they were flying it around their ship, and the pilot operator lost control of it, and it plunged into the housing where the spy radars were housed. This was on, I think, a Ticonderoga class ship, and it just blew right on through the sheet metal and took out about $30 million worth of computers, which, had that happened during a battle, that's the end of the ship's ability to fight, because everything goes through those computers. Those computers are down. The radar doesn't work. The missiles can't launch. That's basically it. Turn the ship around and start paddling like crazy here. But hey, they do look good in the books and the computer games and so forth and so on. Apparently, there is still a major problem within the military, specifically the Army, of soldiers who are committing suicide. And you have to wonder, what are these kids being put through that drives them to suicide? Or in the case of Thousand Oaks, what drove this former Marine to suddenly flip on out and shoot up a bunch of Western music lovers, country Western music lovers. So apparently, Army Secretary Mark Esper is saying that they're going to have more sergeants posted or making visits to the barracks on weekends to help reduce the number of soldiers who die by suicide. Apparently, on the weekends, the sergeants go home, and the soldiers who are left there in the barracks on the weekends, I guess it gets lonely, and their demons come back to haunt them. But Army Secretary Mark Esper was saying, it's a tragedy we have suicide in our ranks. Yes, it is. But it's coming into our ranks from society writ large. Every week I'm signing letters to families offering my condolences for soldiers who have taken their lives. And that is a tragedy. All this money for weapons that don't really work, and really not spending enough money to keep the soldiers mentally clear and balanced. I do know that they do hand out lots of antidepressants. We had somebody who called into the show once, was a veteran of Iraq, said they were handing out antidepressants like they're candies. Maybe there's a link there to those suicides. All right, let's get into the economic news here. And Ken Rokoff is basically saying a Chinese recession is now inevitable, and don't think that America is going to be decoupled from it. The economies are too tangled up. Always the downside of globalism. A problem in one country becomes a problem in every other country that it's tangled up with here. According to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the U.S. will exert relentless pressure on Iran unless the Islamic Republic gives up its revolutionary course, without really saying what's so revolutionary about Iran these days. Basically, the official gave an ultimatum to Tehran saying that Iran must act like a normal country or see its economy crumble. Iran is acting like a normal country. They've got roads, schools, hospitals, cars. People get up in the morning, they go to work, they go to worship services, they go home, they go to bed. What is it about Iran that is so unnormal? Well, it's normal for other countries to do what we tell them. That's what's going on here. And you have, first of all, the irony of the United States screaming about Iran's religious government while ignoring Israel's recent nation-state law, which very clearly put religion at the top of the political structure there. But this is about gaining control of Iran's oil and basically trying to change their government. The last time they tried was 2009. It didn't work out. So they're getting ready to try it again. But we're in an economic war with the U.S. and Iran. And we don't know how it's going to come on out because lots of nations are saying, we're not going to get mixed up in this thing. And the U.S., in order to save face, is now granting waivers to the countries that weren't going to pay attention to the sanctions anyway, to make it look like the U.S. is still relevant to what's going on. And it isn't. It's all falling apart. Now, the U.S. is going to allow Iraq to buy electricity from Iran. And Baghdad purchases much of its electricity and natural gas from Iran, making it heavily reliant on that country for a sufficient supply of its energy needs. And the new sanctions slammed down on Iran by the U.S. Was causing Iraq to be fearful it would be unable to obtain the energy it needs. So the State Department said, yeah, you can go on buying from Iran. It's not really working on out there. Now, here is something very interesting. U.S. envoy to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said yesterday, Moscow wants to lift banking sanctions on North Korea put in place to curb Pyongyang's nuclear program, but the United States would not let that happen. I don't think Haley has any idea of how they could do that. What's the United States going to do? Throw more sanctions on Russia? They've already got sanctions all over the place. They lose their effectiveness after a while. I think the rest of the world is getting really kind of tired of the U.S. government throwing its weight around. We're no longer seen as any kind of a moral leader. We're perceived as a criminal society from the top down. Fish rots from the head. Over at Wells Fargo, they are cutting 26,500 jobs. They're closing branches. They have declared excess capital and dropped $40 billion on stock buybacks. So it sounds to me like they're hunkering down. And of course, the executives basically just gave themselves massive multi-million-dollar raises because their compensation deals are based on how much excess capital they have. Of course, shutting down branches and firing people may generate an immediate surge of excess capital for those year-end bonuses, but in a way, they're killing the goose that lays that golden egg. Story coming out of governmentslaves.info. Apparently, college entrance test scores are collapsing across America. And the reason is very simple. The dumbed-down liberal education system is teaching social justice and other indoctrinations instead of skills. We are raising a generation of children who will be unable to compete in the global technological marketplace. We got to take a break here for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And the latest spin coming on out from the corporate media is that in this confrontation between Trump and Jim Acosta, that the White House intern assaulted Acosta and he was just defending himself. That's the latest spin. It is really out there. All righty. Ooh. That's a shame. Apparently one of the Westworld locations at Paramount Ranch has burned down. I'm sure they'll have the money to put it back up here again. I remember being at Universal when that whole back lot caught on fire. That was spectacular. It was a long time ago. All right, let's get back to the real world here. Google, as you know, is now facing all kinds of legal actions regarding their censorship. And Google is trying to defend themselves from the possibility of regulations to enforce equal free speech by saying that basically, if Google is bound by the First Amendment, that Google and YouTube and other service providers will lose their ability to protect their users against offensive or objectionable content, including pornography, hate speech, personal attacks, and terrorist propaganda. Now, basically, this is going into the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who may rule in Google's favor. But what they're saying basically is that free speech is a disaster for society. And knowing a little bit about how websites and databases are run, I don't buy this idea that a First Amendment right to political content makes it impossible to block pornography. And as far as the hate speech and personal attacks, you know, you're not going to have freedom of speech without offending somebody. And if you're forced to make a choice between freedom of speech and never being offended by anything, go for the freedom of speech. Because there is no right to not be offended. I know that's a liberal fantasy. Oh, we're going to create a world where you never feel bad, you're never offended. It's just not going to work. If you have freedom of speech, somebody's not going to like what you're saying. And unfortunately, the reason Google and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter are dealing with all of this is the very clear liberal bias that has been seen in their filtering algorithms, along with the fact that they're willing to push corporate fake news at the same time they're attacking independent media that are trying to get facts out there. So they've been compromised. Story coming on out of ZDNet. As you know, Microsoft is pushing Windows 10 as a service. In other words, you don't buy the software or license the software anymore. It's month to month. You pay every month. But apparently that's not working out very well, and there are problems. Of course, there seem to be problems with Windows 10 as a whole. Okay, there's the music. We got to take a break for station identification, and when we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be here. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire with her unique perspective on the world. So what do you want to talk about first?
Well, first, for those who are so inclined, prayers, please, for all of those in California who have been hit with these devastating fires. And some of them may come out with something that they had, or they may come out with just the clothing on their back. It's just spread that rapidly.
Yeah, it's the Santa Ana winds are just driving this thing.
Yeah.
And again, the fire breaks appear not to have been maintained.
Yeah, that's criminal. I'm sorry. But there's a lot going on, not only here in the U.S., but all over the world. And I'd like to start with the situation in Yemen. And this is from an Oxfam representative. Oxfam is a very well-known and respected care and providers of emergency food and medicine to people in need. And this gentleman is sort of really yelling the j'accuse at UK, US, and France. And he made the statement that millions in Yemen are starving, and those 3 countries are behind it. And why are they behind it? Because they have consistently supported the Saudi regime's war against the Yemen people. And
you see, this is really Saudi Arabia acting as a proxy for the U.S.
Yeah.
This is all about the people of Yemen wanting to kick out the foreign puppet rulers imposed on them some years back.
Well, I think I remember correctly that in the last election in Yemen, there was only one name, Mansour Hadi.
Oh,
that was it.
Boy, that must have been a nail-biter of an election.
Oh, yeah.
We better keep quiet. They'll start doing that down in Broward County.
Stop it. But what this guy is saying, his name is Richard Stanforth, and he's Oxfam's UK's regional policy officer for the Middle East. And he said, we've got 14 million people starving in Yemen. And the British, French, and American governments are all behind this. They're all supporting this war. And Stanforth really blamed the British government in particular. And he made the observation that London should stop its arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And, oh boy. And he also talks about what's getting hit by the Saudi air runs. He mentioned, we've seen attacks on water infrastructure, hospitals, warehouses of food, and the pattern is continuing. And he also went on to say that certainly the airstrikes are killing the most civilians. Now, even with the positive publicity about Oxfam, and it deserves it, it's a great charitable organization. Mike, I've got to sincerely hope and pray that the Stanford gentleman is wearing his Kevlar undies. The people signing those arms deals, including the U.S.'s merchant of death-in-chief, a.k.a. Donald Trump, does not like the world really seeing what happens to the arms they are selling to Saudi Arabia.
Well, they certainly don't want to see when they don't work properly, because Russia takes advantage of that. I think this is less Donald Trump and more John Bolton, because John Bolton, we've dealt with him before. He never met a war that he didn't like. He could have been John McCain's twin brother separated at birth.
Yes, a brother from another mother.
Yes.
Also in the UK, they have gone full-on surveillance. And now, for every single citizen of the UK, you're going to have your DNA recorded, fingerprint, face, voice, biometric data for every single citizen in the UK. And in looking at this, it seems like they're looking at 1984 not as a cautionary tale, but a how-to manual.
Well, it does seem to be that way.
Yeah.
Along with, of course, looking at some of the stuff the Stasi used to do in East Germany.
Yeah.
Where they would literally collect samples of your body odor from inside your home. And they literally had a warehouse with these jars of people's saved body odors. So if they needed to, they could get out the tracking dog and hunt them.
Oh, gosh.
If you bought a typewriter, you remember typewriters? It's a computer without the screen.
Wayback Machine.
Yeah. You were required to type out a text on a piece of paper and submit it to the government where they would keep it on file, so that if you wrote something on that typewriter that they didn't like, they would know who did that. And by the way, there is a parallel system like that on your color printer, and most people don't know about it. But along with whatever else it is that you're printing, the printer will put out a pattern of yellow dots, which are very, very difficult to see unless you're working under a blue light or a blue filter. And that pattern of dots identifies the specific machine the paper came out of.
Wow.
Yep.
And I seem to remember how the Soviets got away from that, and the typewriters being licensed, if you will, were fax machines.
Well, we were talking, Soviet Union did the same thing with the typewriters as well. But no, the people just went on, writing up these stories and sending them through the fax machines. Anyway, we've got to do a quick shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And all of this, of course, like the military industrial complex or the medical industrial complex, it's just another way of generating an industry that absorbs huge amounts of money without actually doing anything of any real value, because
never gives it back.
Yeah. And you look at all this surveillance and security that's going on. They're not catching the cyber criminals. They're not catching the terrorists. Like any other government program, it's just a huge waste of money that will be fiercely defended by those people who are getting those paychecks.
Yeah. I'd like to kind of bop over to another story from when the hits the fan. It's Mac Slavo's site, and there's a lot of really good information there. And one of the articles he ran today was Fox News promotes RFID for medical purposes. And then he goes on to an explanation of why you should never allow yourself to be chipped. Now, we know that it was seen kind of as a conspiracy theory before. Now it's kind of right in our faces.
Yeah.
And
mandatory vaccinations,
yep.
mandatory chips.
Yep. And in any event, the ads, whatever, aren't the only ways. They're trying to push people to get the chip. And there have been commercials to push it. And one showing a concert, another showing a doctor using it to diagnose patients' disorder. But a story this particular writer will never forget is about a Saudi inventor that had a brilliant idea to make a chip with a lethal dose of cyanide in it. Release it,
thrills.
That person dies. You know, you don't know what the moneyed people are going to want to do with you. And when you have that chip, it's going to be too darn late. You know?
Yeah, that's basically, well, you know, we got you now.
Yeah.
You know, the first time you disobey us, you curl up and die.
Yeah, exactly. And you were talking about U.S. sanctions. I think President Trump is going into a silly season here. But the U.S. government is issuing new Russian sanctions over profiting on a Crimean report. And apparently today, the U.S. Treasury Department has announced a new round of sanctions imposed against targets inside Russia, mostly related to investments in a successful and profitable hotel and resort on the Crimean Peninsula. And anytime an article uses this language, the U.S. officials are saying that they will sanction all who profit from, here it comes, drum roll please, the annexation of Crimea.
The big lie.
Oh, come on.
722.
Yeah. And its latest flurry of sanctions were tied to the Miria Resort and Spa in the southern Crimean city of Yalta. I've heard Yalta is a very beautiful place to go.
Yes, it is.
And it's rated as a very, very high-end luxury hotel. So President Trump and anyone from your group who is listening to this or watched me post it, I have a word for you, sir. The world knows that Russia did not annex Crimea. Now, I don't know if you're having, Mr. President, what I would call a difficult spell of SMD, selective memory disorder, so I would like you to let me reorient you to 2014 in my exclusive Wayback Machine. Doesn't hurt a bit. That was the year when the duly elected president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, was deposed in a U.S. World Bank coup thrown under the proverbial bus, and Poroshenko was anointed as president of Ukraine.
Yes, President Chocolate.
Yes, president who doesn't like chocolate, for heaven's sakes. And you might remember, or you might not, that even President Barack Obama made a very public announcement in an interview that the U.S. was definitely a part of that coup.
I think somebody even admitted how much money they spent on it.
Yeah. And the other thing I would like to hope our president does know, that Crimea had been a part of Russia until the Russian president Nikita Khrushchev annexed it to Ukraine in the late 50s, as he himself was Ukrainian.
Well, as a matter of fact, that was illegal under Soviet law at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, this is not a case of Trump not understanding what's going on. It's a case of reframing the story to serve your agenda.
I know.
Which is to poke the Russian bear in the eye yet one more time.
Yeah. And the Crimeans understood very clearly post-putsch that there was no representative government for them in Kiev. And so let me remind you, Mr. President, what they did. First, they voted in a free and fair election to ask the Crimean people if they wanted to stay with Ukraine or petition the Russian Federation and join it. And overwhelmingly, the Crimean people voted to ask to join the Russian Federation, and their petition was granted.
It was
now,
actually two separate referendums.
Yes,
the
two,
first
right.
one was for secession from Ukraine.
Yeah.
That one passed overwhelmingly. And, of course, U.S. politicians started screaming about, we must preserve the territorial integrity, of countries around the world. These being the same politicians who are talking about breaking big chunks off of Syria and giving them away to Israel and the Kurds.
And I'd like for President Trump to remember that the U.S. is a signatory to the UN Charter, which guarantees people of the countries in the UN the right to peaceful self-determination. This is exactly what the Crimean people did, Mike.
Yep.
Yet the U.S. government refused to accept what they had done. And you know what really worries me here? Attempting to punish Russia for something it absolutely did not do and lying about what really went down make the options of this new sanctioning look really ugly. Very ugly indeed.
Well, again, like as I mentioned earlier in the show, apparently this high-ranking French minister got up saying, we're not going to let the U.S. be the world's trade policeman.
Yeah.
And to me, that is sending the signal. Everybody's getting sick and tired of the sanctions and the tariffs.
Yeah, one wonders how long the U.S. is going to be able to hang on here if no one's observing them.
You know, everybody, if the rest of the world, all on the same day, dumped their dollars and their treasuries,
oh boy,
it would be over. That would be it. The only thing the United States still has that gives them any power and authority over the rest of the world is the nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there have been back-channel discussions about that. You know, you got a nice country here, be a shame if something bad happened to it.
And this is something that somehow I did not hear on the prostitute media at all. And this is from Global Research, again, a very responsible blog. And the title of the article is Disregard for World Opinion Defines the U.S. Government. And I swear, I didn't see it anywhere. But last week, the UN General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to condemn the U.S. embargo against Cuba. A total of 189 member nations said Cuba did not deserve this embargo, which began in 1961 and has continued unabated to this day. And only two countries, the U.S. and Israel, voted against the motion. No country abstained. And Cuba's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Bruno Eduardo Rodriguez Parilla, has said that the U.S. embargo has cost the island state upward of $933 billion, with losses in the past year amounting to $4.3 billion, which is twice the amount of foreign direct investment into the island. And he said, as he put the resolution forward, that this embargo is an act of genocide against the Cuban people.
Well, this is actually going to become very significant in the near future, because one of the few things that I agreed with Barack Obama was that he wanted to normalize relations with Cuba. And even knowing back then that there was growing tensions being pent up against Russia, I said, this is a smart move. Because remember what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. When Fidel Castro kicked out Batista, he did approach the United States about normalizing relations, and the United States made some rather ridiculous demands. They insisted that Castro sell Cuba's agriculture to American corporations at below market prices, which is what Batista had been doing. And Castro couldn't do that. And so it was at that point that the U.S. declared the embargo. So Castro literally had no choice but to form relations with the Soviet Union, which gave the Soviet Union a toehold inside our hemisphere. And following the U.S. placement of nuclear missiles in Turkey, the Soviet Union put nuclear missiles on the island of Cuba. And that's what led to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
And that may happen again. I seem to remember a recent article, Mike.
It may happen again. It was stupid when the Trump administration came on in. They reversed Obama's policy on Cuba and went back to, being mean and stink face, and we're going to keep the embargo, and we're going to go on pounding on you and hurting you.
Yeah.
And as a result, no big surprise, the Russian republics are talking to Cuba about normalized relations between them.
Yeah.
Mutual support of the economy. They have recreated the same conditions that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, all because the U.S. government knows how to carry a grudge for decade after decade after decade after decade, because that's all this is.
Yeah, and the weird thing to me is we're trading with Vietnam now. Vietnam is a big trading partner.
Yes.
And come on, folks, let's be a little reasonable. I would think that an energy of engagement, kids exchanging schools, colleges exchanging teachers, trade, hospitality, everything working together will encourage the Cuban government to have a good relationship with us rather than push it away.
They have historically wanted a good relationship with the U.S. government.
Yep.
The U.S. government's attitude is, you do what we want first, and then maybe we'll do something nice for you.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about our veterans, which very much have been in the news since this gentleman went in and shot up the bar. And it comes to us from antiwar.com. Again, guys, take a look. It's really worth the time. And the article is called A Badge of Shame, The Government's Wars on American Military Veterans. Now, the U.S. government boasts more than 20 million veterans who have served in World War II through present day. But the plight of veterans today is America's badge of shame, with large numbers of veterans impoverished, unemployed, traumatized, mentally and physically struggling with depression, suicide, marital stress, homelessness, subjected to subpar treatment at clinics and hospitals, and left to molder while their paperwork piles up with the VA.
Yeah, it is a disaster. I remember when they first started the Iraq War, and Donald Rumsfeld was literally complaining that too many of our soldiers were surviving their battlefield injuries, and it was just, it was just costing more than they had planned to spend. So
sickening. Sickening.
It is sickening here. And yes, we know a lot of people who are veterans, they're not being taken care of.
No.
They're
not. And I have to wonder how this gentleman who did the shooting, and I mean, he was a decorated Marine, I believe. How this kid, he's a kid. I'm 69. He was a kid.
Yeah.
How this kid slipped through the cracks, I have no idea. Because if I were a mental health... It may not have been
a case of slipping through the cracks. He was suffering PTSD. What does the VA do when somebody says, I'm suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder? Oh, here's a prescription for antidepressants.
SSRIs, And though, those have a known track record which is documented.
Yes.
In case after case after case after case, Mike.
Okay. We got to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
And we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, apparently, 160,000 people have been ordered to evacuate their homes in California. And what a double tragedy for the city of Thousand Oaks, because one of the fires is bearing down there as well.
Oh, dear.
And that may, in fact, be the same fire that has forced the complete evacuation of Malibu. But here's... Claire and I lived in Southern California. I saw some really horrendous fires.
Yeah, me too.
But again, the situation here is that the money to clear out the dead brush and keep the fire breaks open just wasn't there because of the war economy. And speaking of the war economy, you've got something up on your screen that looks interesting.
Yes, I do. U.S. arms exports up 13% over 2017 as Trump champions deals. Now, what this 13% amounted to in terms of U.S. dollars is $192.3 billion in the year ending September 30th, and that was from the State Department's figures. Looser restrictions coupled with high-level efforts to close deals. In other words,
a lot of arm twisting out there, a lot of bribery.
Yeah, use ambassadors to sell American weapons.
Which is not what the ambassadors are supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be salesmen. They're supposed to be ironing out kinks in our foreign policy.
Yeah. And the largest U.S. arms contractors who sell ships, tanks, planes, missiles, and other goods include Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman Corporation.
Who are all very, very generous campaign donors year after year.
Absolutely. And I think what struck me, I want all American companies to do well, but it really appears to me, Mike, that we now have a merchant of death in chief for a president. Great for the bomb makers, lousy for the countries those bombs are going to fall upon. And all of you who watch the video feed, and all of you who see the comments at Mike's website when I post, these images of Yemeni children getting killed, 2, 3, 4 years old, for what reason? You know, we may be able to assist the Saudis in overcoming in Yemen, but I have to ask Mike, at what moral price to this country?
Well, the moral issue's already gone. The Saudi Arabia's been committing war crimes with the attacks on civilians, use of white phosphorus. There's really no such thing as a moral war. War is the master sin of all, because it contains within it all other sins. And the idea of trying to make war palatable by dressing up your killers in costumes and putting ribbons all over them.
And bright, shiny medals.
It's a big lie. It's basically war is mass murder wrapped in a flag. That's all it really is here.
And getting over to Yemen again, apparently the Trump administration is considering declaring Yemen's Houthis terrorists. Now, this is on the heels of a peace effort just a couple of weeks ago, and now they're considering labeling the Shiite Houthi movement in northern Yemen.
Well, you need to understand the Shiite Houthi movement isn't really a movement. When they kicked out that prior junta,
Al-Hadi,
the Houthis were the government of Yemen. And of course, the media is trying to make you think that they're somehow outside, that they're others, that they don't belong there, but that Saudi Arabia and the United States do. But what the Houthis are trying to do is exactly what the Iranians did back in 1979, which is kick out foreign rule. And unfortunately, I do think the Yemen's is going to lose this one because the Saudi Arabian forces and the UAE forces are getting close to capturing Hodeidah port. And none of the players in this are listening to the United Nations. They're not going to provide any kind of pathways for humanitarian aid. I think basically Saudi Arabia's plan is they're basically going to kill off pretty much everybody in Yemen, so there's nobody left to testify as to what really went on there. It's a scorched earth policy as near as I can see.
And one of the observations made in this article was that it reflects Trump's desire to go after perceived Iranian allies to the Houthis. And Saudi Arabia is attacking the Houthis and has accused them of being in league with Iran. And, you know, that's kind of a made-up thing.
It is a made-up thing. And it's, I mean, you know, Saudi Arabia is in league with the United States. Nobody says anything about that. Yemen and Syria are in league with Iran. Oh, horror of horrors, horror of horrors. And again, it's a way of the corporate media of trying to basically spin things so that you get this image of we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And what we do is right and just and moral. And when they do exactly the same thing, it's evil and it's a war crime. So you really need to free yourself from that corporate media spin cycle. Now, we've got to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And there's yet another development in this voting circus down in Florida. Apparently, a statement was made under penalty of perjury. This is coming from Marco Rubio. Palm Beach County election workers were filling out new ballots supposedly to replace damaged ballots, but did not allow campaign representatives to witness the process of creating the new ballot to make sure it said exactly the same thing as the so-called damaged ballot.
Oh, dear.
Okay, this is required under Florida law. Okay.
Unbelievable.
Okay, you've wanted to talk more about this.
I'd like to kind of finish up with Yemen. It is glaringly and painfully apparent to me that neither President Trump nor one of his BFFs in the Middle East, the Butcher of Yemen, aka Crown Prince bin Salman, don't want peace, but want to continue this war to its ultimate conclusion. And now that it looks like Hodeida is being circled and the roads are being cut off, that may happen very, very soon. You know, when I was a kid...
Whoops.
Sorry, dear.
Yeah, got
to When I was a kid, I never used to think of myself in context as being a citizen of a country that committed war crimes.
Well,
that doesn't occur to you.
Growing up, all we got was from TV news in our schools that said we were the good guys, and we were victorious, and only the bad guys like Stalin and Hitler, and they did all these horrible things, but we didn't do it because we've got the sweetest smelling army in the world.
And it's very frustrating. I wish we were a little younger and with a little bit more able to take care of ourselves. That we could go to a country that is civilized enough that it doesn't aid and abet other countries' war crimes like we're doing with Saudi Arabia in Yemen. It's a very sad moment of realization, I'm sure, for me and people who are getting close to 70. Yeah, our country does. This is what we do. And speaking of killed in foreign wars, there has been a study in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan that the U.S.-generated wars have killed, and this is a moderate number now, 500,000 people. And this study really reminds me of that phrase from Karl Marx, all wars are economic in their origin.
That's it. It's all about greed. It's all about control of resources.
And in Afghanistan, you've got the pipelines, rare earth minerals, and of course the poppy crops.
Puppies.
In Iraq, you have the pipelines, and in Pakistan, you have a really embarrassment of natural resources. And the government's MO in more recent years, post 9/11, has been to destabilize, regime change, ensuring that they are installing a U.S.-centric government, then selling those resources only to countries approved and by approved corporations and for the U.S. dollars.
It's not since 9/11. The U.S. has been playing that game since at least the end of World War II.
But that even one person dies. I'm sorry, in my world, there is no such thing as collateral damage. We are brothers and sisters in this life, and, but even if that one person dies, let alone numbers like this, Mike, this is one of the most appallingly immoral, and as though the U.S. government collectively will be able to continue those practices with complete impunity.
And by the way, collateral damage is another one of those media words to make it sound like it's not that big a deal. These people were killed. They were blown to bloody shreds by U.S. weapons. That's just collateral damage here. I mean...
And guys, I'm sorry I get emotional about this, but I see so many ways that this country could be getting what it wants geopolitically without firing a shot, and that doesn't seem to be happening.
Well, it's not happening because this country went down a bad course of basically turning its back on manufacturing, then sabotaging its own agricultural industry with GMO. The United States doesn't have anything to really work with. The United States is kind of mined out. We don't even have a lot of natural resources other than oil, which we're still punching holes deeper to get that. But a lot of the mines that used to power American industry, they're tapped out, they're mined out. And so we don't really have anything to work with. And 30 years ago was a point where a wise and prudent government would have started thinking, okay, we have to make a change. And I'll give you, a good example. The nations in the Middle East understand that oil's not going to last forever. And that's why they're getting into nuclear power, and that's why they're diversifying their investments. And they're trying to attract more tourism and business by giving a good business climate. The United States can't even really offer that, especially when you look at some of our major cities like San Francisco, which now has to have a poop squad.
Oh, dear.
Okay. Yeah, we're a nation in decline.
Yeah.
And I fear that the conventional thinking in Washington, D.C. is that we'll regain our greatness by going on out and conquering the rest of the world and smashing it up even worse than our nation is. And then we'll look good by comparison.
Yeah. I would like to go back over to Ukraine now, because the U.S. Embassy in Kiev has done a very not wonderful thing. They are urging Donbass residents to boycott the November 11th elections. And the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics will elect heads of government on 11 November. Now, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev has urged residents of eastern Ukraine to boycott the elections scheduled for November 11th.
Well, these elections that are scheduled for the 11th, which is this weekend,
right,
are to elect governments for Lugansk and Donetsk.
Yeah.
And obviously the United States is still trying to sell the idea that all the Ukrainians are, obedient to Kiev. They're not trying to break away. They all just, sing kumbaya and hug each other. And that's why the embassy's made that statement, which was a dumb thing to do.
Yeah.
Because it's going to motivate the people in these republics to get on out there and vote like crazy. So I imagine the next step is that probably the United States is already grabbing the election supervisor out of Broward County and throwing her on a plane.
Yes.
To send her down there. In fact, that's her face right there.
Oh, dear.
Send her on over and make sure the election goes the way we want it to.
Yeah. And what I have asked, is that the ambassador, Marie Jovanovic, and her deputy chief of mission, Pam Torment, cool their jets. And it appears that both these ladies, as well as our president, have collectively and conveniently forgotten that the U.S. is a signatory to the UN Charter, which specifically states in Article 1, Section 2, just like the people in Crimea did, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Let me run that by again. To develop friendly relationships among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. Okay.
Well, the United States, like Israel, ignores the UN whenever it's convenient. The only time they ever talk about the United Nations is when they can accuse some other nation of being in violation. Oh, you northeast, southwestern ham, you're in violation of the UN Charter. And again, it's all for propaganda. But it should be very obvious that the United States government has gone just as outlaw as the government of Israel.
Yeah. And by telling the people of DPR and LPR that such an election is meaningless, the U.S. is really attempting to evade its moral responsibility to these people and as a signatory to the UN Charter, because what these ladies are asking these people to do is the polar opposite, Mike, of the UN Charter, a document to which I would remind you the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine are all signatories. And it looks to me like the U.S. wants to halt this exercise in terms of self-determination because it doesn't suit them or Ukraine.
Well, that's exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
Self-determination, if we let the people actually determine their own future, it'll be a mobocracy. And
it already is with Antifa here in the United States.
Really. But Broward County has found another 78,000 votes.
Amazing how that happens.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
I'm stunned. I'm stunned.
But selective enforcement of the UN Charter, which the U.S. is again attempting to do in this manner, is looking very ugly right now. The optics are officially horrible, and I am respectfully calling out Ambassador Jovanovic and Deputy Chief Tremont to please cease and desist. These people...
Well, unfortunately, they don't work for you.
I know. Darn it. Okay. All right. I have a few things. I know that you've talked about this, the mob at Tucker Carlson's home as a suspected hate crime. And I really, I'm angry at this, Mike. We are better than this as a people.
Okay. I didn't realize they'd vandalized.
Oh yeah, they vandalized the house
as well.
Yeah, you know.
I knew they'd spray painted something on the driveway.
And D.C. police are investigating a left-wing mob's protest at the house, which happened earlier this week. And they're calling it a suspected hate crime with anti-political motivations.
Well, I don't think they did it because they love him.
No, they did not do that. And, you know, in looking at the damage, Mike, this is disgusting.
Yes.
And has no place in civilized society. Now,
I wish we lived in a civilized society.
Hear, hear. But now there are moments when Mr. Carlson and I do not see eye to eye on a number of issues. But I would expect that we both, as decent human beings, would be able to make our points understood using logic and reason as our weapons without ever resorting to physical violence.
Well, that's if you've got logic, reason, and facts to support your point of view. But what we've seen with liberalism and this push toward communism, they can't win the arguments on the facts, logic, and law, and that's why they're resorting to this kind of brown shirt tactics.
And then again, the Antifa folks, Maxine Water included, who has encouraged this kind of confrontation, but was terrified when she thought it was going to come back to her.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, these people may not be
hurt them.
Yeah. But they may not be the brightest bulbs in the closet. And because they are collectively, intellectually bereft of any common sense or logic, they really don't have a clue, Mike, to see the level at which they're being used and manipulated by the moneyed leftistas in this country. I think I just invented a word.
Well, remember what happened to those brown shirts when Hitler finally did win political office in Germany?
Yes,
they call
I
it
do.
The Night of the Long Knives.
Yeah, I do. And so I'm saying, would any of the uber rich have been down there for 1 second? Perhaps, let's say, a Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, or Barbara Streisand? Heck no. They expected their poor little deluded minions to do the dirty work and act out of their rage for them at a safe difference while putting people's lives and families at risk.
Well, Stalin had a name for that kind of people. He called them the useful idiots. And we have a caller on the line.
Oh, great.
All right, so let me turn up your headset volume here. And Art Off the Grid, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Hello, lovely Lady Claire. How are you today?
Doing well. What's on your mind today?
I have so tried to resist doing this, but I can't help myself. Keep talking about finding all of these ballots.
Yes.
Now, what would happen? Two points here. What would happen, first of all, if the shoe was on the other foot, and it was Republicans challenging the outcome and suddenly finding boxes and truckloads full of uncounted ballots in Florida, and of course, several boxes in a school in Arizona. My goodness, how did they get there?
Yep.
Magic. Magic.
And and David Copperfield can't touch this one.
No.
And the second one is here in Georgia. Stacey Abrams, boy, I tell you what, she just plain won't give up. She is now accusing, and I'm still trying to find someone who can explain this one to me. She's accusing Brian Kemp and his campaign of trying... I almost can't even say this without laughing.
Okay.
Trying to use old math to count the votes. What other kind of math are we going to use?
Oh,
that
dear.
one is really out there. I mean, counting votes is actually quite simple. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
You know, what does she want? Her votes to be counted with the Fibonacci sequence? 1, 2, 4, 7, 12.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. But Art, let me ask.
For you, two for me.
Pardon?
I said one for you, two for me.
Yeah.
How far away was she from a runoff vote?
Brian Kemp is, as of yesterday, was still a little over 1% ahead of her. And they're claiming right now, here in the state of Georgia, there are less than 70,000 provincial votes. And even if every single one of them went to her, it still would not be enough to qualify for a runoff.
Okay. But that is a rather peculiar statement for her to have
old
made.
Math. We want these elections counted by Common Core graduates.
Oh, yes.
Because we know they'll always count for the Democrats.
Anything else, Art?
No, I just thought I would throw that out there and see what kind of chuckles we could get.
Oh,
because
yeah.
This is just insanity here. And now I've heard in several states, and I'll leave you with this something to ponder. Several states have now spoken out. Democrats are wanting to change the way that votes are counted because, as with, remember several years ago when Kennedy passed away, they had to have a special election to replace him.
Yes.
And, of course, the Democrats wanted to change the rules, which they had done back in the 70s. They had already done that in the 70s. They didn't like the way the rules were, so they changed them. And now, when this recent Kennedy passed away several years ago, they wanted to change them back to the way they used to be because they didn't like the way that it was going.
Art, I'm going to put you on hold. Don't hang up. I'm going to come right back to you after this commercial break. Aloha America, welcome back to the show. We're finishing up with Art Off the Grid. And Art, you were saying that apparently in several states, Democrats are demanding a change to the rules on how the ballots are counted. I mean, are they actually asking a recount based on changed rules?
No, from the way I understand it, and I've only heard brief mention of this, apparently this stems going back as far as the Trump victory. And they're basically singing the same song they were singing shortly after Trump won the election. Was apparently they don't like this whole concept of the Electoral College. They want the popular vote, meaning if 1,000 votes are cast, whoever got the majority. That's what they're wanting.
Yeah, but that doesn't apply here because
apparently
there's no Electoral College involved in the midterms.
Yeah, like here in the state of Georgia, they're claiming that Stacey Abrams got the popular vote. So she's a little bit upset that she didn't win, because she got the popular vote. And this reminds me of, if you remember, Mike, you're like me. You got a really good memory for these kind of things. Was it the late 70s or the early 80s when the Democrats had lost the senator from Massachusetts, and they wanted to change the way that he was replaced?
Yes.
So they changed the rules, and lo and behold, their guy won. And then here a few years back when Mr. Kennedy passed away, they again wanted to change the way the rules worked. And lo and behold, their candidate would have won had they gotten away with it. This is the typical, we don't like the way the rules are, so we want to change the rules. How would people react if the NFL changed their rules because they got tired of the Dallas Cowboys winning?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over to Las Vegas and demand they change that game from 21 to 22 because then I would own that strip. All right, well, listen, Art, we're going to let you go. Art, we're going to let you go here, and I want to leave you with a thought, and it has to do with something called the consent decree. Now, for many, many years, there has actually been a legal ban on Republicans investigating Democrat election fraud. And it's why there is so much of it, because nobody can look into it. It was called the consent decree. It was a settlement arrived at over another lawsuit regarding the Democrats accused the GOP of trying to intimidate voters by having a security guard at a polling place or something like that. That consent decree has now expired. Okay. Dustin in New Jersey, real quick, what's on your mind?
I have bad news for everybody. The Westworld set is burned to the ground.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, there's a lot of different Westworld sets.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I saw that coming through on one of my members' pages. So
okay, and then real quick, Mike, the migrant caravan has left Mexico City, headed for the border. So there's another flashpoint in the next couple of days, I guess.
Oh,
that's all I got to say.
All right, I was hoping things were going to kind of calm down now that we're past the midterms, but it seems like we're just getting crazier and crazier. Anyway, the point of the end of the consent decree: if you are a Republican in any state, you are now free to investigate Democratic election fraud, and I urge everybody to do that because the system is totally out of control. Okay, there's the music. Time for us to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. And have yourself a really good weekend. Have a safe weekend. Veterans Day is Sunday. Monday, of course, is a holiday. And please donate to RBN. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back Monday, or I'll be back on Monday.
Yes.
Aloha, America.